As the last box left their house, Mike and Linda stood in what had been the TV room, now empty and ready to become his office again. But something had changed. "You know," Mike said thoughtfully, "maybe we could make this a combination space. Your mom mentioned wanting to teach you some of her old family recipes. We could put a comfortable reading chair in here, make it somewhere you could sit and go through her recipe cards together." Linda looked at him in surprise. "You'd do that?" "We're partners," he said simply. "That means finding ways to blend our lives, not divide them." The following weekend, they hosted their first family dinner with the new arrangement. Rose proudly showed off her already flourishing herb garden on the condo patio, while Bob demonstrated how he'd organized his new TV room. The conversation flowed easily, without the underlying tension that had marked their meals for so many months. Later that night, after her parents had gone home to their new place, Linda and Mike sat on their back patio, enjoying the peaceful evening. "Thank you," Linda said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up, for being willing to work through this, for understanding that helping my parents didn't mean I love you less." Mike smiled, pulling her closer. "Thank you for being willing to find a better way, for remembering we're a team." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the evening birds. Their house felt like their own again, but somehow richer for the struggle they'd been through. They had learned that love didn't mean choosing between family and marriage. It meant finding ways to honor both while keeping their relationship strong at the center. And in the end, that's what made their house truly feel like home again. After 6 weeks of counseling sessions, countless difficult conversations, and many cups of coffee shared in quiet moments, Mike and Linda finally felt ready to tackle their living situation. They sat together one Sunday morning at their favorite coffee shop, away from the house and its tensions, reviewing their options. "I've been looking at some properties," Linda said, sliding her tablet across the table. "There's a small condo complex just 10 minutes from us. They have units designed for seniors, with emergency buttons and wider doorways for Dad's walker." Mike scrolled through the listings, noting the reasonable prices and modern amenities. "These actually look nice. And your parents would have their own space, while still being close enough for regular visits." "Mom wasn't thrilled when I first mentioned it," Linda admitted, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "But after I showed her the photos of the community center and the garden club they have, she seemed more interested." The past month and a half had brought many changes. Through their counseling sessions with Dr. Wilson, they'd uncovered layers of unspoken expectations and fears. Linda had finally opened up about her childhood trauma of losing her grandmother to a fall when no one was home to help. Mike shared his own struggles with feeling valued in the relationship and his fear of losing their identity as a couple. "I talked to Dad yesterday," Linda continued, her voice softer. "Really talked to him about everything. He admitted they're scared too. Mom's been having trouble with the stairs, though she won't say it out loud. And he knows his arthritis isn't getting better." Mike reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "How do you feel about all this?" Linda's eyes welled up, but she smiled. Honestly, relieved. Dr. Wilson was right. Trying to force everyone under one roof wasn't solving the real problems. It was just creating new ones. That afternoon, they visited the condo complex together. The sales agent, a friendly woman named Pat, showed them a ground floor unit with a small patio. The layout was perfect, open and accessible, but still cozy. The master bedroom could easily fit Bob's recliner, and the kitchen had all the modern appliances Rose loved, just in a more manageable size. "And look," Linda pointed out, "there's a community garden right outside. Mom could still grow her herbs, and she'd have other people to garden with." The next step was bringing Bob and Rose to see the place. They chose a quiet Tuesday morning when the complex would be peaceful. Mike watched as Rose's initial reluctance faded when she saw the built-in security system and the emergency call buttons in every room. Bob's expression softened when he noticed the grab bars in the bathroom and the smooth transitions between rooms, no thresholds to trip over. "And you're really only 10 minutes away?" Rose asked Linda for the third time, her voice wavering between hope and uncertainty. "Yes, Mom. Close enough for regular dinners and visits, but everyone gets their own space." Linda's voice was gentle but firm, a new tone she developed through their counseling sessions. The decision wasn't instant, but it came faster than anyone expected. Maybe it was seeing other active seniors in the complex, or perhaps it was the relief of not having to navigate stairs anymore. Within a week, Bob and Rose had put in an application. Moving day arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. This time, instead of chaos and tension, there was organization and teamwork. Mike had helped Bob carefully pack his beloved war documentaries, even suggesting a better storage system for them in the new place. Linda and Rose sorted through years of accumulated belongings, making decisions about what to keep and what to let go. They spent the next hour exploring options, painful truths emerging alongside possible solutions. Linda admitted she felt guilty about her father's declining health, as if moving them in could somehow turn back time. Mike acknowledged his own fears about losing the life they built together. As the session drew to a close, Dr. Wilson gave them homework. Each had to write down their non-negotiables about the living situation, but also 3 things they were willing to compromise on. They were to share these lists at their next session in 2 days. Walking to their cars afterward, Mike and Linda stopped in the parking lot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the asphalt. "I miss you," Linda said softly. "Will you come home?" Mike hesitated. "I miss you too. But we need to figure this out first. Really figure it out, with everything on the table." She nodded, understanding. As they stood there, awkward but not angry anymore, a text came through on Linda's phone. Her face fell slightly. "Mom wants to know what's for dinner," she said, then quickly added, "But that can wait. Maybe we could get coffee? Just us?" Mike felt a small spark of hope. It wasn't a solution, not yet, but it was a start, a tiny step back toward each other, toward the partnership they'd somehow lost along the way. Mike spent that night at a hotel, staring at his phone, waiting for a message from Linda that never came. The next morning, he called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. As he sat in the hotel room, surrounded by generic artwork and the faint smell of cleaning products, he realized they needed help beyond what they could manage on their own. Around noon, his phone finally lit up with a text from Linda. "Can we talk? Maybe with someone professional?" Relief flooded through him. At least they both recognized they needed help. Within an hour, he had found a marriage counselor who could see them that afternoon. Dr. Karen Wilson had experience with family conflicts and cultural differences, exactly what they needed. The counseling office was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Mike and Linda sat on opposite ends of a plush beige sofa, the space between them feeling like a canyon. Dr. Wilson sat across from them, her gentle presence somehow making the silence less uncomfortable. "Tell me why you're here today," she began, her voice calm and professional. They spoke over each other immediately. "My wife moved her parents in without. He's being completely unreasonable about me." Dr. Wilson held up her hand. "Let's try this one at a time. Linda, why don't you start?" Linda twisted her wedding ring nervously. "My parents needed help. Dad's health is getting worse, and they couldn't manage their house anymore. We have the space, and they helped us buy the house. I don't understand why Mike is being so difficult about this." Mike shifted in his seat but stayed quiet, following Dr. Wilson's gestured instruction to listen. "It's how I was raised," Linda continued, her voice cracking slightly. "Family takes care of family. When my grandmother got sick, she moved in with us. That's just what we do. I can't turn my back on my parents when they need me." Dr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "And you didn't discuss this with Mike beforehand?" Linda's shoulders slumped. "I knew he wouldn't like it. He's always been so independent, so focused on doing everything on his own. I was afraid he'd say no, and I couldn't bear that." "Mike?" Dr. Wilson turned to him. "What are your thoughts?" Mike leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I would never have said no to helping your parents, Linda. But I wanted to be part of the decision. This isn't just about them moving in. It's about how every decision was made without me. The financial help they gave us, I didn't know about it. The changes to our home, I wasn't consulted. My office being turned into a TV room, I found out after it was done." "I hear a lot of pain around feeling excluded," Dr. Wilson observed. "Linda, how do you respond to that?" Linda wiped away a tear. "I didn't mean to exclude him. I was scared. Scared of losing my parents, scared of failing them. When Dad fell last month, before they moved in, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining them alone in that big house, something happening, nobody there to help. Mike felt his anger softening as he watched his wife struggle with her fears. Dr. Wilson seemed to notice the shift. Mike, what are you feeling right now? I understand being worried about your parents, he said quietly. But Linda, we're supposed to be partners. When you keep things from me, when you make huge decisions without me, it makes me feel like I don't matter in our marriage. Of course you matter. Linda turned to face him for the first time. But I feel torn in half. You want our perfect, peaceful home, and my parents need me. I don't know how to make everyone happy. Dr. Wilson interjected gently. Perhaps the goal isn't making everyone happy, but finding a solution that everyone can live with. Mike, what would you need to feel respected and included? Mike thought carefully. I need us to make decisions together. I need some space that's just ours. And I need to know that our marriage comes first, that we face these challenges as a team, not as opponents. Linda nodded slowly. I need to know my parents are safe and cared for. And I need you to understand that helping them isn't a betrayal of our marriage, it's part of who I am. These are all valid needs, Dr. Wilson said. The question is, how can we meet them in a way that works for everyone? No, Mom, you're not going anywhere, Linda said firmly. Then she turned to Mike, her eyes blazing. If anyone should go, maybe it should be you, since you clearly care more about your precious office than family. The words hung in the air like poison. Mike felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Without another word, he grabbed his keys from the counter and walked out, leaving behind the remnants of their failed dinner and the pieces of their shattered peace. As he sat in his car in the driveway, staring at the house he'd once been so proud to own, he wondered how things had gone so wrong so quickly. Through the window, he could see Linda and her parents in heated discussion, their gestures animated in the warm kitchen light. The scene looked like a perfect family moment, except he was on the outside, looking in at a home he no longer recognized as his own. Dinner that evening was unusually quiet. The only sounds were forks scraping against plates and Bob's occasional comments about the TV news playing in the background. Mike pushed his pot roast around his plate, the tension from their earlier conversation still hanging heavy in the air. You've barely touched your food, Rose pointed out, her voice carrying that mixture of concern and criticism that had become all too familiar. Are you feeling sick? I have some herbal remedies that always worked for Linda when she was growing up. Mike set his fork down carefully. I'm fine, just not very hungry. It's probably all those take-out lunches at work, Rose continued, sharing a knowing look with her daughter. I keep telling Linda you both need to pack home-cooked meals when Bob was working. Mom, Linda interrupted, noticing Mike's jaw tightening. Not now, please. The silence that followed was deafening. Mike could feel his patience, worn thin over the past 2 months, finally reaching its breaking point. He pushed his chair back from the table. Actually, let's talk about it now, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Let's talk about all of it. Linda shot him a warning look. Mike? No, Linda. We need to address this. He turned to face his in-laws. Bob, Rose, I understand you needed a place to stay, and I respect that you're Linda's parents. But this is still our home. You can't just take over rooms and rearrange everything without asking. Rose set her fork down with a clatter. Take over? We're family. Family doesn't need to ask permission to make themselves comfortable. Comfortable is one thing, Mike replied, struggling to keep his voice level. But you've changed every room in the house. You moved my entire office without even telling me. You've rearranged our kitchen, changed our routines, and taken over our living spaces. Bob muted the TV, finally turning his attention to the conversation. Now listen here, young man. We contributed a significant amount to help you buy this house. Without our help, you wouldn't even be living here. The words hit Mike like a punch to the gut. He turned to Linda. How much exactly did they contribute? Because you still haven't told me the full story about that. Linda's face flushed. They helped with half the down payment, she admitted, not meeting his eyes. Half. Mike stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Half the down payment, and you never thought to mention this? We spent weeks planning our finances, Linda. We made spreadsheets, calculated budgets, and the whole time you knew we had this hidden help. I knew you wouldn't accept it if I told you. Linda's voice rose to match his. "You're so proud, so determined to do everything on your own. But there's nothing wrong with accepting help from family." "It's not about accepting help." Mike's frustration burst out. "It's about honesty. It's about making decisions together as a couple. You made a huge financial decision without telling me, and now you're letting your parents take over our home without any discussion." Rose stood up, her face reddening. "Take over? We're trying to help." The house was so cold and impersonal before. All those modern furniture pieces, those grey walls, it didn't feel like a home. "It felt like our home," Mike shut back. "The home we planned together, or at least I thought we did. Every piece of furniture, every color choice, we made those decisions as a couple. Or at least I thought we did." "You're being ungrateful," Bob joined in, his voice gruff. "After everything we've done." "Everything you've done?" Mike laughed without humor. "You mean everything you've done in secret? Everything you've changed without asking? The way you've invaded every private space we had?" "Invaded?" Linda slammed her hand on the table. "They're my parents, Mike. They needed our help. What was I supposed to do, let them struggle alone?" "You were supposed to talk to me." Mike's voice cracked with emotion. "We could have found a solution together. We could have helped them find a smaller place nearby, or looked into assisted living options. But you made all these decisions without me, and now you're acting like I'm the bad guy for wanting some say in my own home." The room fell silent. Rose had tears in her eyes, Bob's face was red with anger, and Linda stood trembling, torn between her husband and her parents. "Maybe this was a mistake," Rose said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Maybe we should just go." As they walked back to the kitchen, where Rose had already served everyone's plates, ignoring Mike's portion control preferences, he realized this wasn't just about furniture or room arrangements anymore. This was about respect, communication, and the fundamental understanding of what it meant to be married. And somehow, he needed to make Linda see that before their dream home became the thing that tore them apart. 2 months had passed since Linda's parents moved in, and Mike felt like he was living in someone else's house. That morning, he sat in his car in the driveway for an extra 10 minutes, gathering the energy to go inside. Through the window, he could see Rose rearranging the living room furniture again. The third time this week. The final straw came when he walked into what used to be his office. The room had been completely transformed. His desk was gone, replaced by a massive TV mounted on the wall. 2 oversized recliners faced the television, and a mini fridge hummed in the corner. Bob sat in one of the recliners, feet up, watching a game show at full volume. "Where's my desk?" Mike asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Oh, we moved it to the garage," Bob replied, not taking his eyes off the TV. Rose thought this would make a better TV room. "The living room gets too much glare in the afternoon." Mike stood there, staring at the space where his carefully planned home office had been. The built-in bookshelves he'd loved now held Bob's collection of war documentaries and Rose's ceramic figurines. His photography prints had been replaced by faded family photos and a large cross-stitch of a countryside scene. "Did Linda know about this?" Mike asked, though he already knew the answer. "She helped us move everything this morning before she left for work," Bob said, turning up the volume as his show returned from commercial break. Mike walked out to the garage, finding his expensive desk buried under boxes of Christmas decorations and old magazines. His leather chair was nowhere to be seen. The desk surface had a scratch he was sure hadn't been there before. He pulled out his phone and texted Linda, "We need to talk when you get home." Her response came quickly. "About what?" "About how I just found my office completely dismantled without anyone asking me." The typing bubble appeared and disappeared several times before her reply. "Mom and Dad needed their own space to relax. Your desk was taking up too much room." Mike stared at his phone in disbelief. Too much room. In his office. In his house. He took several deep breaths, trying to calm down before responding. The rest of the day at work was a blur. Mike couldn't focus on his meetings, his mind constantly returning to the image of his displaced desk and the casual way Bob had dismissed his space. By the time he drove home that evening, his initial shock had hardened into determination. Linda was in the kitchen when he arrived, helping Rose prepare dinner. The air was thick with the smell of pot roast, Rose's recipe, not the healthier version Mike and Linda used to make. Can't we talk? Mike asked Linda quietly. Privately? Rose looked up from her cooking. Dinner's almost ready. Why don't you two set the table? Mom, we'll be right back, Linda said, following Mike to their bedroom, the only space that still felt somewhat their own, though Rose had already suggested different curtains would brighten things up. Mike closed the door and turned to face his wife. What happened to discussing things before making major changes to our home? It's not a major change, Linda defended. It's just moving some furniture around to make Mom and Dad more comfortable. Comfortable? Mike's voice rose slightly. Linda, they've taken over our entire house. They've changed every room, moved our things without asking, and now they've completely dismantled my office, the one space I asked to keep for myself. They need a place to relax, Mike. Dad's arthritis is getting worse, and the living room chairs aren't comfortable enough for him. And what about what we need? Mike countered. What about the home we planned together? The spaces we designed? Does none of that matter anymore? Linda's expression hardened. Then my parents, Mike. They needed help, and we have the space. I don't understand why you're being so selfish about this. Selfish. The word hit him like a physical blow. Is it selfish to want some say in how a home is arranged? To want to keep just one room for myself? To expect my wife to discuss major changes with me before making them? They contributed to this house too, Linda shut back. Or did you forget that part? No, I haven't forgotten, though I'm still not clear on exactly how much they contributed since you never told me about that either. Mike ran his hands through his hair in frustration, but even if they paid for half the house, that doesn't give them the right to take over completely. We're supposed to be partners, Linda. We're supposed to make decisions together. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dinner's getting cold, Rose called out, and Bob needs to take his medication with food. Linda moved toward the door, but Mike gently caught her arm. This conversation isn't over. No, she agreed, her voice tight. I suppose it isn't. The garage, which once housed Mike's workout equipment, gradually filled with boxes of old magazines Rose couldn't bear to throw away, and Bob's collection of half-finished woodworking projects. Mike's tools disappeared into Bob's workbench, and somehow his parking spot became storage space for Rose's artificial Christmas trees, all three of them. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon when Mike overheard Rose talking to Linda in the kitchen. Honey, I think we should repaint the living room. That gray is so depressing. I saw this lovely floral wallpaper at the store. Mike retreated to the backyard, his last remaining sanctuary. Sitting on the patio furniture, which had mysteriously been rearranged according to Rose's feng shui beliefs, he scrolled through photos of how the house had looked just a month ago. The clean lines, the thoughtful design choices, the peaceful atmosphere he and Linda had created together, it all seemed like a distant memory now. That evening, as he tried to work at the dining room table while Bob's war documentary blasted from the East Wing, Mike caught Linda's eye across the room. She was curled up in an armchair, pretending to read but clearly lost in thought. For a moment, he saw in her expression the same overwhelming feeling that had been building in his chest, the sense that their home, their space, their life together was slipping away, replaced by something neither of them had truly prepared for. A loud crash from the kitchen interrupted his thoughts. Don't worry, Rose called out cheerfully. Just rearranging some cabinets to make more sense. You really should organize by meal type, not food type. Mike closed his laptop slowly, knowing he needed to address this situation before it completely spiraled out of control. But as he looked at Linda, who was already rushing to the kitchen to help her mother, he wondered if it was already too late. Their dream home had become a battlefield of competing needs and expectations, and he wasn't sure how much more he could take. The moving trucks arrived early on a Saturday morning, their diesel engines breaking the peaceful weekend silence. Mike stood at the kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, watching as Linda's parents pulled into the driveway. He'd spent the past week trying to come to terms with the situation, but seeing those trucks made everything feel painfully real. Linda rushed out to greet her parents, hugging them tightly as if she hadn't seen them in years rather than just last weekend. Her father, Bob, moved slowly with his cane, while her mother, Rose, directed the movers with the energy of someone half her age. Mike took a deep breath and stepped outside to help. Oh, honey, be careful with that box. It has my china collection. Rose called out as Mike lifted a heavy cardboard box from the truck. The label read living room, though they had agreed the east wing would be their space. Mike bit his tongue and carried it inside. What started as moving their essential items quickly turned into an avalanche of belongings. The guest room filled up first, then the hallway, and soon boxes lined the walls of what had been Mike's office. His carefully arranged desk and bookshelves were pushed against the wall to make room for Bob's oversized recliner, a worn-out piece of furniture that clashed horribly with the room's modern design. "Dad needs his chair for his arthritis," Linda explained when she saw Mike's expression. "And Mom thought their dresser would look nice against that wall." She gestured to where his built-in bookshelf used to be, now hidden behind a massive oak dresser that had probably been fashionable in the 1980s. By the end of the first week, the East Wing had transformed completely. The subtle gray walls Mike had chosen were now covered with family photos, endless shots of Linda's childhood, her parents' wedding, and various family reunions. The elegant light fixtures they'd picked out had been replaced with Rose's collection of stained glass lamps, casting multicolored shadows across the walls. The changes weren't just physical. Their daily routines shifted dramatically. Mike used to enjoy quiet mornings with his coffee, catching up on news before work. Now, Rose was always up early, watching morning talk shows at full volume while preparing elaborate breakfasts nobody had asked for. "You're too skinny," she'd say, piling pancakes onto Mike's plate despite his protests that he was trying to watch his cholesterol. In my day, men ate proper breakfasts. The evenings weren't any better. Bob had a habit of falling asleep in front of the TV, the volume turned up so loud it could be heard throughout the house. When Mike tried to work from the dining room table, his temporary office solution, he could barely focus over the sound of game shows and news broadcasts. Even their private conversations weren't private anymore. One evening, as Mike and Linda discussed their monthly budget in the kitchen, Rose wandered in to make tea and stayed, offering unsolicited financial advice based on how they'd managed money back in their day. The bathroom situation became another point of tension. The East Wing bathroom, once a spa-like retreat, now overflowed with medications, unfamiliar toiletries, and various medical equipment. The marble counter Mike had loved was barely visible under all the pill bottles and ointment tubes. "Mom, didn't we agree you'd keep your things in the cabinets?" Linda asked gently one day, but Rose just waved her hand dismissively. "I need everything where I can see it, dear. At my age, you can't waste time looking for things in emergencies." Mike felt his chest tighten. His office, the peaceful sanctuary he'd been so excited about, the room that had helped convince him to buy this house. He stood up abruptly, needing space to think. "I need some air," he said, heading toward the front door. Behind him, he heard Linda call his name, her voice a mixture of frustration and play, but he couldn't turn around. Not yet. Not until he figured out how their dream home had suddenly become the center of a family crisis he never saw coming. As he walked around their neighborhood in the growing dusk, past other beautiful homes with their warm, glowing windows, Mike couldn't help but wonder how many other families faced similar situations behind those perfect facades. The weight of the decision, or rather the lack of his involvement in it, pressed down on him with each step. He knew this conversation was far from over, and somehow he had a feeling this was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. 3 months into living in their new home, life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Mike and Linda had settled into their new routines: morning coffee on the patio, evening walks around the neighborhood, and weekend brunches in their beautiful kitchen. The house had begun to feel truly theirs, with family photos adorning the walls and their personal touches in every room. That Tuesday evening started like any other. Mike had just returned from work, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. The smell of Linda's cooking, her signature pasta dish, filled the air. Everything seemed normal, but there was something different about Linda's demeanor as she moved around the kitchen. She seemed distracted, checking her phone more often than usual. "How was your day?" Mike asked, pouring himself a glass of water. He noticed Linda's slight hesitation before answering, the way she kept rearranging the plates on the counter, little signs he'd learned to read during their years together. "It was fine," she replied, stirring the pasta sauce with more concentration than necessary. "Mom called today." Mike nodded, only half listening as he scrolled through his work emails. Linda's mom called almost every day, usually to share neighborhood gossip or ask about their weekend plans. But what came next made him nearly drop his phone. "They're selling their house," Linda said, her voice carefully neutral. She turned off the stove and faced Mike directly. "Dad's arthritis is getting worse, and the two-story house is becoming too much for them to manage. Plus, with the housing market the way it is." Mike looked up, feeling a slight unease at the tone of her voice. "That makes sense. Have they found a smaller place yet?" Linda took a deep breath, and in that moment, Mike knew something big was coming. "Actually," she said, fidgeting with her wedding ring, another telltale sign of nervousness, "I told them they could move in with us." The kitchen fell silent. The only sound was the quiet bubbling of the pasta sauce and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Mike stood perfectly still, his mind trying to process what he'd just heard. "You told them." He finally managed, emphasizing the word told more than he intended. "When did we discuss this?" Linda's expression shifted from nervous to defensive. "I didn't think it needed discussion. They're my parents, Mike. Dad can barely climb stairs anymore, and their medical bills are piling up. We have all this space." Mike set his glass down carefully, trying to keep his rising emotions in check. "Linda, buying this house was a huge decision we made together. Moving your parents in, that's an equally huge decision. Don't you think we should have talked about it first?" "What's there to talk about?" Linda's voice rose slightly. "They need help, we have the space. Mom and Dad helped us with the down payment, remember?" This was news to Mike. He felt like the floor had suddenly disappeared from under his feet. "They what?" Linda's hand flew to her mouth, realizing she'd let slip something she hadn't meant to reveal yet. I was going to tell you. Mom and Dad contributed to our down payment. They took money from their retirement fund to help us get this house." Mike sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his mind racing. All those careful calculations they'd made, the pride he'd felt at achieving this milestone, it suddenly felt different. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd react like this." Linda's eyes welled up with tears. "You're so particular about being independent. But their family, Mike. In my family, we take care of each other. We don't just abandon our parents when they need us." "This isn't about abandoning anyone," Mike said, struggling to keep his voice level. "It's about making major life decisions without consulting your spouse. How would you feel if I invited my brother to live with us without asking you first?" "That's different," Linda insisted, though her voice wavered slightly. "These are my parents. They're getting older, they need support, and this house is partially theirs too." The pasta sauce was starting to burn, filling the kitchen with an acrid smell, but neither of them moved to turn off the stove. They stood there, the growing tension making the spacious kitchen feel suddenly cramped. "When?" Mike finally asked, his voice quiet. "When are they planning to move in?" Linda busied herself with the burnt sauce, avoiding his eyes. "That meeting with their realtor tomorrow. Once their house sells." She paused, then added quickly, "I thought they could take the east wing. You know, where your office is. It has that full bathroom, and it's away from the main living area." Little did Mike know that their dream home would soon become the center of a family crisis that would test their marriage in ways he never imagined. But for now, in those first precious weeks, everything was perfect. They were living their dream, and the future seemed full of endless possibilities. Mike had always been the kind of person who believed in working hard and dreaming big. Growing up in a modest two-bedroom apartment, he would spend countless hours scrolling through real estate websites, imagining what it would be like to own a beautiful home someday. His wife Linda shared that dream too, though their visions of the perfect home were sometimes different. After 12 years of dedicated work at his investment firm, climbing the corporate ladder one careful step at a time, Mike finally reached the position of senior portfolio manager. Each promotion meant a little more money saved, a little closer to their dream. Linda, too, had built her career as a marketing executive, and together they had created a comfortable nest egg. The day they drove through the upscale Oak Grove neighborhood, something felt different. The tree-lined streets and well-maintained gardens gave off an air of peaceful luxury that immediately caught their attention. Then they saw it, a for sale sign in front of a stunning two-story house with large windows and a wraparound porch. Mike still remembered how Linda squeezed his hand as they pulled into the driveway. The real estate agent, an older gentleman with kind eyes, opened the heavy wooden front door, and the couple stepped into what felt like a scene from their dreams. The entrance opened into a grand living room with soaring ceilings and a beautiful stone fireplace. Natural light poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making the hardwood floors gleam. Mike could already picture himself sitting by that fireplace with a good book on quiet Sunday mornings. The kitchen was a chef's paradise, all stainless steel appliances, marble countertops, and a center island big enough to host family gatherings. Linda's eyes lit up at the sight of the double ovens. She had always loved hosting dinner parties, but their old kitchen barely had room to move around. The dining room next door could easily seat 12 people, perfect for the holiday celebrations they had always wanted to host. Upstairs, the master bedroom suite took Mike's breath away. It wasn't just the size, though it was larger than their current living room, but the little details. A reading nook by the window overlooked the backyard garden. The en-suite bathroom featured a freestanding tub and a shower with multiple jets. The walk-in closet was bigger than their first apartment's bedroom. But it was the room Mike envisioned as his home office that really sealed the deal. Located in the quiet east wing of the house, it had built-in bookshelves and a large bay window that offered a perfect view of the rising sun. He could already imagine himself starting his mornings there, coffee in hand, planning his day in peaceful solitude. The backyard was another pleasant surprise. A covered patio led to a beautifully landscaped garden with mature trees providing natural shade. There was even a small fountain whose gentle bubbling created a sense of tranquility. Linda immediately started talking about the garden parties they could host, maybe even setting up a small vegetable patch in the corner. The price was steep, higher than they had initially planned to spend. That evening, they sat at their small dining table, surrounded by spreadsheets and calculator apps on their phones. They went through their savings, discussed their monthly budget, and looked at different mortgage options. It would be tight for the first few years, but with both their salaries and their careful financial planning, they could make it work. 3 weeks later, they signed the papers. Mike remembered how his hand shook slightly as he wrote his signature, the weight of the biggest purchase of their lives settling on his shoulders. But when Linda looked at him with tears of joy in her eyes, he knew they had made the right decision. The following month was a whirlwind of activity. They spent weekends picking out furniture, debating color schemes, and planning each room's layout. Linda insisted on getting the perfect sectional sofa for the living room, while Mike spent hours researching the best desk for his home office. They even hired an interior designer to help them select lighting fixtures that would complement the house's architectural style. Moving day finally arrived on a sunny Saturday morning. As the movers carried in their belongings, Mike and Linda stood in their new foyer, arms around each other, watching their dream take shape. The house felt massive compared to their old apartment, and Mike joked about needing a map to find his way around. That first night, they celebrated with takeout pizza on the floor of their new living room, surrounded by boxes but filled with excitement about their future.